Hello, welcome back to the latest You Are My Boro with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo, and we're coming to the end of the second international break of the season. And I can't really say too much, Scott, because I've had a few days off. You've had to work through. It's had a proper early season international break feel, hasn't it? You know, when just before we press record, we say, right, what have we got to talk about? You know when you're in a bit of trouble.
You're in trouble. It's been quiet, hasn't it? I mean, even from a non-Boro kind of England international perspective, it's been pretty dull, hasn't it? Obviously, the defeat at Wembley with Carsley's experiment and then Finland. But the fact that it's the Nations League, it all feels pretty inconsequential, doesn't it? And then you've obviously got some Boro players scattered all around the world, but the games they're playing, hardly you want to get your teeth into. And then obviously, in terms of what's been going on back at Rockcliffe, it certainly feels like it's been incredibly quiet. So roll on the weekend and Bristol City and we're back into it. There's one more of these international breaks to go, isn't there, in the middle of next month? But then at least after that, that's it till March. So it does feel like it's been a pretty disjointed start of the season. I know we kind of say this every year, but this break in particular has felt like a slog.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to take stock, but I don't think you need it, do you? When you've had, however many games, and you split these early months of the season, don't you, like 4 or 5 game blocks. It does feel like there's one too many, I think, in these first 2 or 3 months of the season.
Yeah, and I don't think it's kind of helps that Boro's start has been pretty bitty anyway, hasn't it? There's been a lot of what ifs. There's nothing's gone catastrophically wrong, but there's nothing gone kind of brilliantly right either. So it does just feel like we need to see a bit more of Boro to see which way this season's going to go. And clearly this next block between now and the middle of next month will help with that. Because it does still feel at the minute that, there's a lot of positives. We've been saying this on previous vids, haven't we? There's a lot that Boro have been doing right, but the results just haven't really reflected that yet. And clearly that's the thing that needs to change.
You mentioned there, obviously we won't talk England, but Carsley and what have you. I mean, you've sat in countless press conferences when there's been managerial uncertainty and caretakers are in place and they're asked their obvious question. He's made a right old mess of things, hasn't he, over the last couple of weeks?
Oh my goodness. Well, the Boro one that springs to mind was when you were struggling to get an answer out of Agnew in his first caretaker spell, that he clearly didn't really know when he was going to be doing it or how long he was going to be doing it for. And that felt like you were asking a guy who just either didn't want to answer or couldn't answer. The Carsley one's been bizarre because, he would have known at every press conference and after every game he was going to be asked about whether he wanted the job, what were his hopes, what were his plans. So just come up with a stock answer and stick to it. But he's painted himself into such a corner. He's, like you say, he's been speaking in riddles that I think it's undermined. I mean, listen, the performance, the team selection, everything in that Greece game probably scuppered any chance he had of getting the job anyway. But I think even if it hadn't, the fact that he hasn't been able to give any kind of a straight answer over his future plans wouldn't have helped him. And like I say, we've seen it with Boro, haven't we, that it does get messy with a caretaker. But in general, they either come out straight away and say, yeah, I want the job, or they just point blank refuse to answer it. What they don't normally do is speak in the kind of riddles that we've seen from Carsley.
And then go back on himself and question.
Bizarre.
Yeah. Back to Boro then in Bristol City this weekend. Just first of all, on Bristol City, obviously the awful news came out this week about Liam Manning and his son Theo. It goes without saying that our thoughts, and I think everyone obviously associated with Middlesbrough's thoughts are with him through this incredibly difficult time. And I would fully expect there to be a real show of support for him at the Riverside this weekend. Obviously, he's not going to be there. He's a leave of absence. But yeah, just the most awful news that obviously puts things into perspective before the game.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit cliched to say, isn't it, that things are bigger than football. But clearly, when you hear a story like that, and it's just so incredibly sad, and what he must be going through, what the family must be going through, and clearly him moving away and just forgetting all about football for a while is the right thing. And yeah, your heart goes out to him, doesn't it? And like, there will clearly be a response from the Bristol City fans that travel up to the Riverside at the weekend. But I think Boro fans will all will all want to show their support too. It's just a horrible, horrible thing to happen.
Yeah, the most the most devastating news when you read that this week. I'm pretty sure when I look back, I'm pretty sure Manning and Carrick know each other pretty well. Didn't they coach together or go through some of the badges
I think
together?
they did the badges together. I'm sure that we've spoken to Carrick about it before, and Manning's one of the people he references as being on that course.
Yeah, I'm sure I remembered some quotes from last year where Manning talked about that. And for Boro, I guess there's a desperation to get back to action after that Watford game and the disappointment that we talked about last week, and the fact that Carrick, usually so eager to put defeats and disappointments behind him, admitted that this one is going to sting. The desperation now is to quickly put that behind you and get 3 points on the board and use it as a springboard, really, ahead of these next group of games before the next international break.
Yeah, and it's back-to-back home games, isn't it? We've got Bristol City at home on Saturday. We've got Sheffield United at home on Wednesday. Clearly different types of tests. Sheffield United, have done really, really well under Chris Wilder. There was a lot of question marks about how much upheaval there was going to be there. I think he's done a really good job in getting that team sorted and getting them hitting the ground running. So these two games, we always say, I think it will tell us a fair amount about Boro because, as we've said at the start of this vid, while performances have been there, and Carrick's absolutely right to say that Boro have been doing an awful lot right, in pretty much all the metrics, whether it be expected goals, attacks created, big chances, the fact that they're not giving up a lot of big chances. Boro are right up there with the top teams in the league, but the results haven't reflected that. And there's only so long you can keep saying that we're doing everything right and it'll come and all of that. Eventually, if you're not translating all of that into positive results, and it suggests that there are problems that you just aren't being addressed. So, I do think it's a big week for Boro. I think that the fact that we've got 2 home games straight off the bat at the end of this international break means that, I think these 2 games will go an awful long way to dictating the mood in this entire next block up to that November international break. Because I think by the end of the Sheffield United game, we probably will have a bit clearer idea of, are Boro actually on the right track, or are there issues here that are stopping them getting the results that the performances arguably deserve?
And when you mentioned there about the issues, it's funny because I was reading about Bristol City before we started, and some quotes from Liam Manning, and it was teed up with, despite controlling games, the Robins have struggled to convert chances, which has drawn criticism from some sections of the fans. Manning told Bristol Live, probably sat here slightly frustrated that we haven't got more points, but it's part of it is for me to assess where we are. We need to start turning real good control and possession into more chances. I'm thinking you could so easily be reading Michael Carrick and talking about Middlesbrough there rather than Bristol City.
Yeah, which tells you 2 things, I think. One, it tells you that Bristol City are a side who are wanting to do the same kind of things that Boro do. They want the ball, they want control of games, they want to pass, they want to build up patiently. So does that mean that they won't come and do what some teams have done to Boro, i.e. sit off, be really passive, not be interested about possession and look to hit on the break? From what we've seen of Bristol City so far, and certainly from what you're hearing from Manning, that's not the way he wants his side to play. Now, obviously he's not going to be actually there, but it's still his team. They'll still be doing everything that he's been indoctrinating into them so far this season. So I think that's an interesting dynamic. I also think it speaks to the fact that for all Michael Carrick will come out and say these things, fans won't take that forever because everybody says it, even if it's justified or not. Managers right across all the leagues will say we deserve more points. We should be higher up the league than we are. I'm generally happy with what we're doing. You can only keep banging that drum for so long. And while I do think, in fairness to Carrick and Boro, the stats do bear out a lot of what he's saying in that respect. And actually, Boro are doing an awful lot of things right. You can't keep saying it. You just can't, because fans have heard it time and time again. So, we're not there yet, but there will come a point where results have to start reflecting what Carrick is saying and what Boro are doing, because otherwise it just doesn't matter, because ultimately results are what count.
Especially when it's the same thing or the similar things that are costing you each
time
week.
And time again, exactly.
Yeah. Then the obvious criticism or the obvious response is, well, what are you doing? what are you doing to turn these frustrations into positive results? You mentioned there about how Bristol City are going to set up or are likely to approach the game. They've had 55.7% of possession in games so far this season, which is clearly up there at the top end of the championship. And they're averaging 13.2 shots per game. Compared to Boro's 17.6, again high. Like you say, it all points to the fact that they're going to come and probably play their own game. You would think it'd be quite a major change of approach, and we've seen teams do it. Tom Cleverley talked about it after the Watford game, how he doesn't want his teams playing like that. But it'd be a quite major change of approach to come and completely throw that out the window, wouldn't it? And set up like other teams have.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, like, we have seen it this season. You referenced Watford there. I think you can throw Sunderland into it as well, because I think Regis Brice asked his team to do things very differently against Boro. They sat off much more than they have been doing in other games. So it's not out of the question that Bristol City completely change tactics and do something very different to play Boro. It feels like the fact that Manning is describing this as a long-term project. He wants his team to get used to playing a certain way. Well, it's harder to do that if then all of a sudden you're backtracking for a one-off game and saying, actually, forget all that. I want you to do something completely different. I think this will be a game between two sides who want to dictate possession, want the ball, and want to be the ones dictating the tempo and the pace of the game. I suspect whoever comes out on top of that will probably have the best chance of winning the game, won't they? Let's be honest. So, can Boro dictate what they want to do more effectively than Bristol City trying to do the same thing?
Yeah, it's 54.9 Bristol City. They're averaging the sixth highest. Boro's 55.7. They're averaging the fourth highest possession so far. We're obviously recording on Tuesday afternoon here, so we haven't been over to speak to Michael Carrick yet in his press conference. That comes on Thursday. And top of the agenda, as is most often the case when we go over to Rockcliffe on a Thursday, will probably be injuries. Tommy Conway probably being the top of the list, really, of knowing whether he's going to be fit and available for two reasons. A, because of Bristol City and obviously the story there against his former club, but B, because he's had such a positive start, really, and Boro have looked at a better, more threatening side, I think, more urgency in the forward line when he's been in there.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I agree with that. I think Conway has been a big success. I think he's definitely offered something different. He's made an impact in the games that he's played. He's obviously scored goals. However, I do think if you're playing him in the number 10 position, that then has asked the question of what do you do with Finn Azaz? And the answer up until now has been play Azaz on the left. And I just don't think that's worked. So if Conway is fit and if he is back in the starting lineup, then I do think Carrick's got a pretty big decision to make about what does he do with Finn Azaz. Does he play him out on the left? And he might be tempted to do that because while Riley McGree's available, he's currently out in Australia. He's playing overnight tonight against Japan. He won't be back in training with Boro until Friday. Carrick tends to like playing the players who he's had working with him the week before the game. So I think there would have to be big question marks over whether McGree starts this game. Now, he's got Bergzorg there. Obviously, Micah Hamilton played out there. So there are options, but the temptation might well be there to play Azaz on the left. Although, of course, Azaz has been away as well, hasn't he? So, that's another dynamic into it. And then on the right-hand side, are we saying that Ben Doak is now nailed on as the starter there? Or is there still a battle with Jones? Where's Marcus Forsyth in terms of his comeback? Yeah, so, there are selection issues that Carrick has to make across that three behind who you would imagine Latalath will be starting there. And a lot of those decisions will be impacted by whether Conway is in the team or not.
And it is the great unknown, really, of this season so far, isn't it? What will be the strongest first choice front four? And I know Carrick could say, "Well, I don't have a first choice starting 11." But if Boro are playing a crunch game against a promotion rival, and everyone's fit, what front four is it going to be? I think we've seen enough to see it's going to be Doak on the right. But the problem is, and we've discussed this already, Conway's been effective in that number 10. Boro look just a better, more balanced team when McGree's on the left. But when Azaz is available, Azaz tends to play. I think McGree being away, I'll give Carrick a reason. If Conway is fit, and I mean properly fit, as trained during the international break and is ready to go, Because if he's just resumed training this week or he's just stepped up this week, then clearly you'd expect him to be on the bench. But if he's fit and ready to go, it wouldn't surprise me if it was Conway 10, Azaz out to the left, and McGree, because he's been away and done a lot of travelling, on the bench. But then all you're doing is shifting the problem, not shifting the problem back, but you're shifting this debate and discussion back 4 days until Sheffield United, aren't you? There's going to come a point where we get the answers really in that. I know we talked about it last week, Lath. You know, how long do you go without your centre forward scoring before questions are asked there and Conway goes up front? Like I said last week, I don't think we're there yet. But if we get 3 more games down the line and Boro's still struggling to put teams away and Lath hasn't scored, then it's a question you ask, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, it is. I mean, you know, I'm with you. I think at the minute it's probably too early to be seriously having that question. But, you know, Lath's only goal is a penalty on the first day of the season. That's you know, that has to be an issue. Whether the chances are there, whether you know, there are mitigating factors behind it. He hasn't had a settled number 10 behind him, etc., etc. The fact still is, we went into this season thinking that Lath would be absolutely the main man. You know, he'd set the world on fire at the end of last season. As long as he was playing anything like that, he'd be scoring a bag full of goals. Well, it hasn't really materialised like that, has it? So, you know, there has to be a point where questions start getting asked. And then lastly, on the selection issues for this weekend, if we're having that kind of conversation about Riley McGree, do we have to have the same one about Aidan Morris? Given that he's obviously been away, or, you know, is away with the United States, he won't have trained with the group for pretty much all of this international break. We don't yet know where Johnny Howson's at. But if Howson is fit and available and has been training alongside, you know, alongside the rest of what Carrick views as his likely starting lineup for most of this last couple of weeks, does he then leapfrog Morris? And you know, Morris, who we thought was pretty much undroppable, does the international break influence that? It's an interesting one because, you know, as you've said and as we both said, Carrick tends to like to start the first game after an international break with most of the players he's been working with the week before.
And at the back, because Dale Fry, touch wood, nothing's gone wrong there. Dale Fry is going to have 2.5, 3.5 weeks now under his belt training. Now, I don't for 1 minute think Fry will be in contention to start on Saturday, clearly, but is he going to be ready to return to the squad? But it's more Matt Clark, George Edmondson, isn't it, on Saturday? Yeah. Because for as good as Edmondson has been, and he has been rock solid, it'll clearly be Vandenberg and at the heart of the defence. And Clark has enjoyed an excellent start to the season. Obviously, dodgy game at Sunderland before he picked up that injury. And Edmondson deservedly kept his place at Watford and played well at Watford and scored the goal. But Boro went under late on, conceded those 2 late goals. There's still clearly a decision to make there as well. I think it's going to be an interesting selection, not just on Saturday, but the next few games. And on Bristol City, the 16th in the league. But it's the classic case of, I guess, where you sit to how we assess it. They've only won 2, but they've only lost 2. They've drawn the last 3. They're unbeaten in 4, but they've only won 1 in 7. It's a classic case of glass half full, glass half empty job, isn't it? I mean, the bottom line is the 16th. And as Manning says there, they want more points on the board. But having only lost 2 games, it's hardly been a disastrous start to the season for them.
Classic championship in so many ways, isn't it? You know, they could come to the Riverside and do a job on Boro and leave with all 3 points, or it could turn into a relatively comfortable afternoon for Boro and you know, they'll brush them aside. It's on Boro, isn't it? You know, I know it's an easy thing to say, and Carrick will no doubt come out and say it, but it's on Boro. If they go into this game right and do everything right and actually take their chances and cut out the silly mistakes at the back, they've got more than enough to be beating Bristol City. And you know, being brutally honest, of the 2 home games that are coming up, on paper, the Bristol City one looks easier than the Sheffield United one. So, you know, if you slip up against Bristol City, then all of a sudden you are under a fair bit of pressure going into Sheffield United on Wednesday night. So I think it is a big game. And, you know, it's never that easy in the Championship, is it? But if Boro are serious about being proper promotion contenders this season, I hate to put it like this, but you've got to be beating Bristol City. You know, a team that's 16th in the league, you need to be winning those home games.
We said the same before the Stoke game, didn't we? They're the games you were winning. That Stoke game, really, we said afterwards, it's exactly what you want from those sorts of games.
And it's the only one really this season that's been like that. Let's be honest.
Yeah. And you do need to build those no-fuss wins, don't you? You do need to get those under your belt if you're going to...
Especially at home.
Yeah. I'll preempt this here. I don't think this has any bearing at all, but Boro don't have a good record against Bristol City.
No.
I think they've won... Look, they haven't won in the last 5. Won 4 of the last 19 against them. And Bristol City have had a fair few positive results at the Riverside, including last season. That doesn't mean anything, does it?
No, not really, because, it's a different Boro team. It's a different Bristol City team. What I would say is Bristol City in nearly all of those seasons have been in and around where they're at now. I can't remember Boro playing Bristol City when Bristol City have been
flying high,
roaring at the top of the table or in massive relegation trouble, looking like they're going to go down. They've nearly always been roughly where they are now. And this speaks a bit wider. We can talk about this. This is probably a complete other video. But Boro haven't been great at putting away those type of sides for a while now, have they? And ultimately, that's probably what's cost them in a lot of the promotion shake-ups that, they've tended to do fairly well against the bigger sides. We keep on saying that. Under Carrick, they've done generally pretty well against the bigger sides. It's what you might term what should be routine home wins over mid-table opposition. And, over the course of a championship season, you play a lot of games like that. And Boro need to be better at putting those sides to bed.
I was over at Rockcliffe last week to speak to Craig Liddell, obviously the academy manager, which was good. There was plenty to come out of that. If that was online on the Northern Echo site over the weekend, if you haven't read it yet, there's a fair bit going on. Obviously, Boro are competing in the Premier League International Cup for the first time this year. They're at the Riverside next month, isn't it? Yeah, which they should be great occasions. Craig was talking about when Boro were involved in, was it the Youth League, UEFA Youth League? Remember when Harry Chapman scored
that goal, didn't he? Chapman, the kind of
and he was talking then
goal.
And he was talking then about just like the prestige and the excitement for the young lads of being involved in a competition like that. I'm just looking at the group there and some of the clubs in Boro's group: Lyon, Bilbao, Benfica, Blackburn and West Ham, but being involved against those sorts of teams is great, isn't it?
You put your hand up for Benfica away?
Yeah, I wouldn't mind getting that through expenses. We'll get on the gaffer about that after. And then we were talking about the young lads, obviously, that have been involved over the last couple of years and how that plays out, really. And this was last week when I went over there, so obviously it was the international break. And he said that at that stage there'd been 9 or 10 of the young lads that day training with the first team. He was talking about how much to get from him. He told about one 16-year-old lad who knocked on his door and came and thanked him and said he'd been starstruck, Boro fan, training with the first team for the first time. But then he was also talking about how there was a conscious decision this year to bring down the age of the under-21s and under-18s teams in the hope that it's pushing them on, because obviously the lads who'd normally be in the 18s are playing more under-21s football. Yeah. So whenever you talk to kind of youth development coaches, they all talk about how you need to park the result, really, don't you, and focus more on the development and progression. But he said really this year, even more so, because you've got a lot of the young lads who are playing above themselves, like Harley Hunt, who he said has come in and just completely bypassed the 18s, went to 21s. Law McCabe, who he said now is full-time in the first team dressing room, which must be class, mustn't it? And then looking back to Hayden Hackney and the breakthrough, and he admitted Hackney was probably on his way out after that Scunthorpe game, after that Scunthorpe loan. Obviously, Chris Wilder, who's back at the Riverside next week. We'll talk more about that at length start next week. But it didn't feature in his plans. He leaves. Hackney gets his chance and kicks on and admits really nobody could have foreseen how he would have kicked on from there. So there was loads to go out. It was a good chat with Craig. If you get a chance to read that, then just dig back through the Echo site. You'll find that on the Boro page easy enough.
Yeah, I thought the Hackney stuff was really interesting. I mean, Leo kind of rightly gets the praise for that little caretaker spell, and obviously, you know, the one that brought Hackney in. Whereas actually, it was Craig Liddell, wasn't it? It was Craig Liddell saying to Leo, "Look, there's a lad here who I would stake my reputation on the fact that he's ready to go in and he won't let you down." In fairness to Leo, he listened to that. And Hackney came in and has absolutely never looked back. But I think you're absolutely right. I think had Chris Wilder not left the club and had there not been that change and had Carrick not come in, there's every chance that Hackney wouldn't have lasted another transfer window and that he would have gone and you know what a loss that would have been. In terms of the wider academy stuff, I also thought it was interesting. There was a piece with Michael Carrick that we ran this week when he was kind of discussing the decision to bring his brother in. And was kind of saying, look, you know, firstly, yes, I was aware of the way that this might be perceived outside. You know, I know people might point the finger and say it's nepotism, it's your brother, etc. But the thing that really appealed to me was when Aaron Danks left, I didn't need another assistant. Jonathan Woodgate's more than capable of doing what I need him to do in that sphere. I felt what I needed was someone to be a bridge with the academy. And that Graham Carrick was working as an academy boss at Newcastle. He was in charge of the under-18s. His expertise is in that area. And I think that's where Michael Carrick sees his brother adding real value, that all of a sudden now there is a much stronger link between academy and first team. There's a much clearer pathway being created. And you know, that's in a wider environment where the head coach is more than happy to get young players involved and give them a chance. So I think all of that is really, really positive in terms of what Boro are trying to do, bringing young players through and has to augur well for the future.
And Craig was talking about how, and he said Marcus Tavernier really is the perfect example. Got released by Newcastle, was picked up by Boro and bounced back from that setback. And he was talking about how kind of no journey, as he put it, is the same, and that progression is never linear of young players. There's bound to be setbacks. You look at Hackney going to Scunthorpe and not getting his game for a team that were relegated from the bottom of relegated out the Football League. Tavernier getting released. Josh Coburn getting released from Sunderland. I think he's talked about that in an interview with the press down in Millwall this week. There's all these kind of setbacks and bumps in the road that can make the young lads really. And you think of Law McCabe, how his progression so far straight into the first team. Yeah, we haven't seen a lot of him so far this season, but he'll be learning so much, the same as Harley Hunt, won't they, and the other lads who are training with the first team, just from being in and around it. And, you know, for all, it's a blow to Michael Carrick to lose his first team players, so many of the first team players during these international breaks. What a chance for those kids to step up and join and train with them for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, like you said, this week, a couple of weeks in particular, you know, they'll be amongst the 10 or 12 more senior players at that training ground, and just the opportunity to fill that role and you know, experience that and have that extra responsibility placed on your shoulders is going to be massive for them. The Hackney loan, I mean, you know, we've talked about this a lot, but what I think is interesting about that is I've forgotten his name, but you speak to the Scunthorpe manager at the time. And I know we've...
It was Neil Cox.
Of course it was.
Yeah,
of course it was. Yeah. And I know we've spoken to Kieran Scott about this, who was obviously in regular dialogue with Scunthorpe. And the message at the time was, look, he's not playing that regularly. He's not, you know, the results aren't there. But a lot of that is because his skill set is just not really compatible to being scrapping for survival in League Two. It was almost like he's already too good for this, if you know what I mean. What Hayden Hackney is good at is not what we need, and that's not the fault of Hayden Hackney. And it doesn't mean it's the loan's a disaster. It just means that at the minute I'm trying to keep my job as Scunthorpe manager, and I need players who'll bite, snarl, scrap, do this, do that. What I don't necessarily need is a potentially international class midfield ball player who is playing passes and making runs that the rest of the team just aren't anticipating and are on the same wavelength as. And I think that's interesting, that from the outside we can look at loans and say, well, that hasn't worked, has it? Well, there's probably reasons for that, or there might be reasons for that. And I thought that was interesting.
Carrick said it a few times, hasn't he? A bad loan can be just as beneficial, if not more beneficial, than a good loan. And you look at Sonny Finch now at MK Dons. I'm not saying it's going to be good or bad. It's obviously very early days. But one of the reasons they sent him to MK Dons was Mike Williamson was the manager there. They'd seen how his Gateshead team played. They thought he was a good fit. They thought the team was a perfect fit. Well, he's obviously left and gone to Carlisle. But it can still be a hugely beneficial experience. I guess first of all, it's a challenge for Finch Wright. How do you adapt now? But even if he isn't to play as much football as you want, you still learn so much from being in and around the first team picture every single day, from seeing how they operate, how different clubs operate, from getting a feel for different leagues and different levels. I know, talking to Ben Gibson early in his career, he went to Plymouth and Tranmere, didn't he? And one of them, I can't remember which club it was, were really struggling. I think they were on the border of administration. Well, I think
that was Plymouth. It was when Peter Reid was manager, or around that time. He was putting his own money in, wasn't he, to keep them afloat by the end.
Yeah, and I remember Ben saying it was such an eye-opener to see lads, worrying about how they're gonna keep a roof over their head for the next month, worrying about the pay slip coming in. And he said, you've got the security of knowing you've got a parent club to go back to. But hopefully those players the players who are out at the minute will come back and benefit from those experiences moving forward. Bristol City, then, just to wrap up, predictions for this weekend. I know it's early doors still, but we're just doing the one vid this week ahead of the game Saturday. So what do we reckon?
Let's go not comfortable, stress-free 2-0. Similar to the score,
but there wasn't much conviction there. I don't know.
No, I know.
I don't know whether I'm buying it.
Because I'm listening to us saying you can't keep saying this, and I feel like every video we say in games like this, it'll come to Boro. They will, they'll get there. They'll make it work. I'm starting to think I can't keep on saying this, but let's give them one more chance. Let's give them this chance. Let's say that actually at home, the performances and results have largely been there. When they've been throwing points away, it's tended to be away from home. I think they'll have too much for Bristol City. I'll go 2-0. Let's go. It depends on Latterlath, 33. Conway, potentially off the bench. 77.
You take 4, but you take 4 points. Bristol City home, Sheffield United home is 4 points.
Yeah, I think so.
Enough return there.
I think so. I mean, listen, you want 6, don't you? Clearly, but I think win 1, draw 1 is a good platform to then be going into the your run of away games and the rest of this block on. Yeah, I think 4 points is a good return. 3 points is probably a minimum requirement. I think anything less than 3, and we're asking questions again about why, are Boro underperforming? Are they not living up to what they should be? That would be my reading of it. 6 is perfect. 4's fine. 3's the least you'd want. Anything less than that is below par.
I'll go 2-0 as well. I'll go Hackney 19.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think a player. I think there's every chance Conway's on the bench. And Conway comes off the bench and scores. So I'll go Conway for a second as well. 83. 83 brings the tension inside the other side.
Just to stop the nerves jangling.
Yes, yeah, indeed. Well, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for listening. Do subscribe to the channel if you're watching on YouTube and you haven't already. And as we say every week, get in touch if there's out you want us to discuss. And if you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review on there. We've seen a few on there popping up recently. We really appreciate that, and it benefits us no end as well. So thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your week. Enjoy the game on Saturday if you're going. Let's hope for a Boro win, and then we'll be back next week to reflect on that game and to look ahead to Sheffield United and the return of Chris Wilder. Take care.